Hello boys and girls of the internet and RU Nation, how are you doing today? I'm doing fantastic, thank you for asking. Now what I'm bringing you today is a Call of Duty commentary. Now don't pay attention to the gameplay, I mean you can if you want, it was a decently exciting game, but that's not what the video is about. This video is an analysis of something that Wings of Redemption said during Painkiller Already number 152 when they were talking about the national debt. Now what he said a solution for the national debt would be is to create a completely national government-based currency, because the current currency is based off of the Federal Reserve. Now, if he was saying that if the United States government backed their own form of currency, they could fade out the Federal Reserve, which would thus eliminate the debt, because the debt is not directly to the American government, but instead to the Federal Reserve, which is used by the American government. So basically, what the Federal Reserve is, it's a bank. It's its own bank that loans out money to other banks at a rate, and it also buys back money in a sense that, like, it gives out these bonds and such that are worth however much, and it's basically an attempt to control the amount of money in the economy, thus controlling inflation and price rates and all these complicated things. You don't really need to know all of that, but what you need to know is that it loans out money to other banks and also to other nations. It sells its money for money, basically. It just sells its money for money, and it's basically the promise of getting more money in other ways, and it gets money. This whole thing is confusing because modern money is not backed by anything. It's just fiat money, which means there's no resources backing it. But basically, it gets money. It gets like the backing of another nation's dollar for the promise that it will pay them back however much later, and it's at usually what is a higher rate. So that's what it does, and that's what creates a national debt. Now, Wings of Redemption cited 2 times in the American history when the national government created its own form of currency. One time was during Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, his era. He created its own form of currency for the North, so that to keep the economy going, basically the northern economy and war machine going, to help fight the South and maintain the Union and just, stop everything from collapsing pretty much. And the other one was Andrew Jackson. Now this is the more interesting time because it created a whole depression off of it. But let's not get into that quite yet. Let's get into a little bit of background about Andrew Jackson and the time in which that he was president. Andrew Jackson absolutely hated banks. The bigger the bank in his mind, the more evil it was. And the National Bank was clearly his hugest target to just eliminate because it's the biggest bank that there was, and he hated it. So when he got into the presidency, that was basically his main goal, just eliminate the National Bank. It was like, there were clearly a bunch of other goals, but that was the one thing that he's just like, this is what we have to do. And he also wanted to get rid of all form of paper money. He hated it. He believed that, barter system would work better if people just used raw materials such as, oh, I'll trade you this much lumber for a cow. Or I'll give you this much silver, like an ounce of silver, to pay for this, or an ounce of gold to pay for this, instead of using an actual physical, just like dollar or coin or etc. He believed that was bad, which is a great irony, because his face is on the most circulated money in all of the world, I believe, because the American $20 bill is one of the most circulated forms of currency in the world. I believe it is the most circulated, but that's a huge irony right there. And as I said earlier, modern money is fiat money, which means it's not backed by anything. If the only reason it holds value is because we believe it holds value, because America says it holds value, If you took it up to, your local bank and said, I want to exchange this for, this much gold. Well, not your local bank, but the actual government. Say, I want this for this much gold. They won't do it. Now, some local banks will do it, or they'll offer, your ability to buy gold with money. But basically, it comes down to, if your government collapsed tomorrow, your money would be worth nothing whatsoever. It's just paper. And that's what happened during the Cold War with Berlin and all of Germany. There were famous photos of people using the money as just toys because it was just no longer worth anything. And that's what happens, it's not backed by anything, which can create problems. Now, the effects of a loss of a bank, which is what Wings of Redemption posed, eliminating the Federal Reserve and replacing it with just the national government giving you money. Like, not giving you money in the sense of communism, but they controlled the money system and just giving out money and when to buy it and when to sell it and how to loan it and etc. Instead of the national government controlling it. Now, when you lose the bank, it created two depressions, both times that the national bank was removed. The Panic of 1819 and 1837. 1837 was the one when Jackson was president, and 1819, I believe it was Monroe, but it was possibly Madison in the presidency when they did not re-sign the charter for the national bank, thus creating depressions. Now, they were not on the level of the Great Depression, mind you, so don't get all confused. They weren't that bad, but they were still bad. Now, this was caused by the fact that once the federal bank and the national bank collapsed, subordinate banks collapsed, because the subordinate banks, such as, say Fifth Third or Chase or Harris or wherever you get your money from, they get their money from the Federal Reserve, or in the time when it wasn't called the Federal Reserve and it was called the National Bank, from the national bank. And the banks could not provide credit, which was a huge thing, especially in the time when agriculture was so, prevalent. So money became basically worthless. There was no loans and there was no nothing. So basically, money was hardly worth anything because no one had any of it. They couldn't get loans to create things, and money was just worthless as a result. The reason that was is there was no backup currency. Andrew Jackson, when he closed down the national bank, he's like, look, this is the money we have. We have no need for there to be more. He didn't use the national government creating its own form of currency. He didn't have them just making money. It's like he didn't just say, okay, this is the new money. And he didn't gradually do it. It just happened, the next day, boom, it's gone. There's no national bank. Screw you, banks. Whatever. I fail at words, but you know what I mean. He just basically, there was no backup. Now, if there was a backup currency, like Wings of Redemption proposed, and that it was slowly phased in, the losses would be drastically reduced, because there would be a form of money backed by the government that could be like, oh, instead of this, which is now worthless, I have this, which is worth something. And it gets all back to the fact that, money in itself is worthless because it's not backed by anything, but it's complicated. But basically, the money from the government would be worth something in people's eyes, and the money from the Federal Reserve would not after it was all phased out. So the government must also take an equal exchange rate and must constantly keep open an exchange. So if any old money is found or anything like that, such as maybe there was a bond from the Federal Reserve, they could get it. So if they found some form of older money, they could exchange it for the new federal government money instead of the old Federal Reserve money. And if that was possible, then people would they would have less losses. However, there would be some major problems with closing down the Federal Reserve. Number one is the government could not and would not unite to support this. They have issues uniting over the smallest things, let alone something that would have such a national and international impact. They couldn't do it. There would just be so much arguing and so much fighting. It would take hundreds of years to even get this onto the floor. So the government would not support this. Number two, it would cause mass chaos on an international level. When we're talking economically, I'm not talking, people wouldn't be rioting the streets. Well, maybe. But odds are they wouldn't be just rioting in the streets because, oh, America got new money, blah. But economically, it would cause mass chaos because people that had money invested in the Federal Reserve by, buying the currency, that's where the debt is created, blah, blah, blah. Basically, those who had money invested in that would no longer get their return on the investment. And that would cause people to be really upset, and they'd be angry, and that would strain some foreign relations, possibly to the point of conflict. If there was, say, let's use China, for example. That's a perfect example. They have such a stake in America's debt. There's such a huge portion of it. And our relations with them were so culture. I can't talk English. I cannot talk English. They are so culturally, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. Different. That they are conflicting with each other already. Now, if we screwed them out of their money, which is what we would be doing, we'd be screwing them out of their investment, they would get ticked, and they would possibly escalate to the point of conflict, because it would hurt their economy. Foreign currencies are a huge part of every nation's economy, but let's not get into that. Basically, all you would need to know for that is it would create so many issues and just problems on an international level that it wouldn't be effective. Now, it would also create a whole new economic system, because it wouldn't work the same way. You know, how do we know how they would operate the new economic system? It could be like, oh, you get this much money for doing something with this, or we have a set loan rate, or it would be entirely up to the government to decide how to run this new economic system. And that would not work well, because as I said before, the government can't unite on anything. They are terrible. I hate them as bad as it is to say this. I don't like politicians because they act like a bunch of whiny little girls. And which is saying something, because I want to get into politics eventually. But they do act like whiny little girls, and they can't ever get anything done. So when that happens, how can we rely on them to create a whole new economic system if they can't even decide on a healthcare law, for example? If they can't even decide on, you know, this or that, or how much you should make for the budget, or how to raise the debt ceiling, or if you should raise the debt ceiling, etc., etc. It wouldn't be good. Let's just put it that way. It wouldn't turn out well. Also, all bonds and other financial tools that are time-based would hold no more value. So let's say you had a bond that would say, you know, in 12 years you would get this much money. But in those 12 years from the time you purchased that bond, the Federal Reserve gets closed down because no one's using it anymore because they're using the new form of currency. Your bond would be worthless, and you wasted your money purchasing that bond. And that bonds and stuff like that are a huge portion of the financial system. It is a lot deeper than it actually seems. It's a lot deeper than just, oh, this is currency, I will give you this. There's so many more financial tools than that, and they'd create so much of our actual infrastructure that once those have been depleted and just not used anymore and destroyed, it would cause people to lose money. Pretty much, they wouldn't get the return on their investment. So basically, in a conclusion, to sum it up, it'd be great in theory, you know, oh, not having any debt, not having this, not having that. But in execution, it would probably fail. It's like the system of communism. In theory, excellent idea, but in execution, not so much, as you can see with Cuba, the Soviet Union. You know, every communist country pretty much has failed. And I'm not trying to get all, you know, oh, capitalism is the best or anything like that right now, because that's a different debate for a different time. But it's similar to that, great in theory and poor in execution. Now remember, I am not an expert on this topic. I did not go to, you know, college on economics. This is literally the knowledge of a 16-year-old boy who just happens to take a huge interest in economics, politics, and history. So, yeah. I can't promise that this is 100% correct, but from what I know, and as far as I have seen, this is correct. And this is a fairly decent analysis, you know, just how I thought of this. So I do hope you enjoyed. Remember, if you did enjoy, like and subscribe. If you want to see more of this kind of video where I just analyze things that people say or things that people do, just basically an analysis commentary, comment. Say, hey, I like this. Do it more. I enjoy this. And I will, hopefully, probably. And remember, I love you all, guys. Adio. Mwah.